The rich kid believed mocked a young gas station girl, crushed her dignity in the snow, and laughed as if the whole world bowed to him. But he didn't see the old pickup at the next pump, or the 42-year-old veteran stepping out with his German Shepherd by his side. And that night, beneath the falling snow, they were about to shatter the cruelty that had ruled this town for far too long. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from. And if stories of courage, justice, and hope in the darkest winter nights speak to your heart, please subscribe and share this story. Someone out there may need this reminder today. A pale winter dusk hung over the outskirts of Bozeman, the wind scattering thin ribbons of powdery snow across the cracked asphalt. The old gas station, Hilltop Gas and Service, sat under the shivering glow of its flickering sign, the kind of place forgotten by tourists, but held together by locals who had nowhere else to go. Lily Parker wiped the frost from a windshield, her breath forming small clouds in the freezing air. At 22, she had the soft, uncertain prettiness of someone who had never been allowed to rest. Light brown hair tied in a messy knot, cheeks flushed red from the cold, and a body wrapped in a thick, faded winter jacket 2 sizes too large. Her movements were practiced, almost ritualistic, but her eyes, large and gentle, carried the quiet fatigue of a girl juggling too many burdens. She worked every shift she could to afford her grandmother's medication, and the weight of that responsibility pressed against her ribs every moment of every day. She told herself she was strong enough, but sometimes, like tonight, when the wind cut through fabric and bone, she wondered how long strength could last before it cracked. A battered blue pickup rolled into the station, its headlights dim, its hood trembling gently with an engine that had lived far beyond its expected years. From the driver's side stepped Ethan Cole, a 42-year-old veteran whose presence seemed to bend the cold away from him. He was tall, broad-shouldered, hardened by years of service and loneliness. His face carried the rugged angles of a man shaped by survival, sharp jawline, days-old stubble, and eyes a deep amber brown, always alert, scanning, listening, evaluating. The kind of eyes that had seen too much but refused to close. His dark hair, threaded with early gray, was cut short in a military style he had never quite shed. A faded army green winter coat hung from him like a shield, frayed at the elbows, but still stronger than anything those young, luxury brand coats could ever be. Ethan didn't speak much. Life had taught him silence was safer, and war had left him with a quiet vigilance that never slept. Beside him leapt down Ranger, a full-grown German Shepherd with a thick black and tan coat that bristled proudly against the cold. At 5 years old, Ranger carried himself with the disciplined confidence of a trained working dog. Muscular, alert, intelligent. His ears twitched at every sound. Even his breaths seemed calculated, measured. To strangers, he was imposing. To Ethan, he was family. Lily gave them a shy smile, the kind she reserved for the few customers who treated her like a person rather than a fixture of the station. Ethan gave a small nod back, nothing more, yet it was enough to lift something weighted in her chest. Ranger, sensing her gentleness, wagged his tail once, restrained, polite, but warm. The quiet evening shattered when a cherry-red sports car fishtailed into the lot, blasting electronic music loud enough to shake snow from the awning. 2 sleek sedans followed, lights flashing, engines revving obnoxiously. The doors flew open, releasing a blast of laughter and arrogance into the winter air. Tyler Hayes, tall, slim, with perfectly styled blonde hair and the kind of smirk only money could afford, strutted out first. He was 21, a college kid who had inherited only his father's wealth, not his work ethic. His designer parka gleamed under the station lights, and his spotless white sneakers looked absurd against the gritty snow. Behind him trailed his friends, Parker, chubby-cheeked and easily influenced, and Mason, lanky, loud, and always filming everything for social media as if the world were his audience. They moved like a pack that had never been told no, laughing too loudly, talking too big, their carelessness cutting through the air sharper than the cold wind. Tyler barked orders without looking at Lily, demanding premium gas right now and waving his hand as though summoning a servant. When a few drops of gasoline splashed near his precious car door, barely noticeable, his face contorted with theatrical outrage. "Are you blind?" he snapped, ripping a wad of cash from his pocket and throwing it at Lily's chest. The bills fluttered down like cruel green snowflakes. "Pick it up, all of it. Maybe then you'll learn not to screw up." His voice was icy, dripping with entitlement. Parker snickered. Mason filmed. Lily stood frozen, shame burning hotter than the cold. Her hands trembled. Her throat tightened, but she fought the tears because she knew tears only fed people like Tyler. The elderly couple in the car behind them watched with helpless fear, too intimidated to intervene. When Tyler stepped forward and raised his hand, as if striking her might be the final punctuation to his performance, the air itself seemed to halt. A rough, calloused hand clamped around his wrist mid-swing, iron strong, immovable. Ethan. His grip was steady, controlled, but unyielding. His voice, when it finally emerged, was low and calm. Too calm. "That's enough." Ranger moved silently to Ethan's side, his muscles taut, his golden eyes locked onto Tyler's friends. A growl rumbled deep in his chest, not loud, but undeniably dangerous, like thunder at the edge of a storm. Tyler froze, his bravado crumbling under the weight of Ethan's stare. For the first time in his pampered life, fear, real, breath-stealing fear, found him. And in that fragile, snowy moment under the gas station lights, an invisible line was drawn. Lily Parker was no longer alone. Snow thickened over Bozeman as night settled across the valley. The kind of heavy winter darkness that pressed against windows and muted every sound beneath its weight. The moment Ethan released Tyler's wrist back at the gas station, the group of wealthy college kids retreated in a flurry of panic, tires skidding on frozen asphalt. But arrogance rarely surrendered quietly, and vengeance traveled faster than the winter wind. Tyler's phone calls began before he even left the parking lot. By the time Lily Parker finished her shift, the consequences were already waiting. Her manager, Mr. Harold Kent, a thin, balding man in his late 50s with perpetually hunched shoulders, stood stiffly near the supply room door. He was a timid figure, his narrow face framed by wire-rimmed glasses, and a permanent nervous quiver lived in his voice as if he feared disappointing anyone with power. Years of being threatened by business inspectors and corporate owners had carved out the courage inside him, leaving only survival instinct. Tonight, when Lily walked toward him with hopeful exhaustion in her eyes, he could not even meet her gaze. "I'm sorry, Lily," he muttered, rubbing his hands together as if trying to wash away the guilt. Mr. Hayes called. He insisted. "I can't fight him. Not if I want this station to stay open." He handed her a small cardboard box containing her belongings without lifting his head. His shame hovered between them like a cold draft. Lily swallowed a tremor as she stepped out into the falling snow. The neon sign above flickered blue and pink against the ground, illuminating her pale cheeks and red-rimmed eyes. Her breath hitched with the sting of humiliation, but the deeper ache came from fear, the cost of her grandmother's medication, overdue bills, and the gnawing worry that she might not be enough to protect the only family she had left. Ethan stood with Ranger beside the truck, watching her with a kind of stillness that wasn't passive but deeply observant. His hands rested on the edge of the open truck bed, broad knuckles scarred and weathered. When Lily tried to smile and failed, he simply took the box from her arms. "Come on," he said quietly, the softness in his voice contrasting with his rugged appearance. "Let me take you home." As they drove through Bozeman's snow-blanketed streets, Ethan kept one hand lightly on the steering wheel. The truck warmed slowly. The heater sputtered weakly, leaving the windshield rimmed with frost. Lily sat beside him, trying to hold herself together, while Ranger stretched out in the back seat, his ears flicking every time she sniffled. The shepherd had a way of watching people without judgment, sensing distress as if wired for empathy. When Lily finally wiped her eyes, Ranger nudged her elbow through the gap between the seats, offering quiet comfort. Her house stood near the base of a wooded hill, a small white cottage, paint peeling, porch sagging, but with a warmth that spoke of love rather than wealth. The air smelled faintly of chimney smoke and pine, and faded Christmas lights framed the windows, though December was barely halfway through. When the front door opened, Evelyn Parker appeared, Lily's grandmother, a petite woman in her late 70s with silver hair braided over one shoulder, her frail frame wrapped in a hand-knitted cardigan. Her face was lined but kind, with eyes bright as if lit from within by a stubborn flame of hope. She leaned on a carved wooden cane, moving slowly but deliberately. "Oh dear," Evelyn whispered the moment she saw Lily's expression. She ushered them inside, her voice gentle but steady. Come in. It's too cold to be sad outside." The house smelled of simmering beef stew and old books, mismatched furniture, hand-woven blankets, and framed photographs lined the walls, evidence of a life built on heart rather than money. Dinner was humble: hearty stew, slices of bread brushed with butter, and mugs of steaming tea. But to Ethan, who had eaten too many rations in too many war zones, it felt like a feast. He watched the way Lily helped her grandmother sit, how she cut Evelyn's bread into small pieces without being asked. He saw exhaustion in her shoulders. Yes, but also devotion. And devotion, to a man like Ethan, was worth more than any wealth Bozeman's tycoons possessed. Just as a laugh finally lifted from Lily's throat, a fragile sound, but sincere, the window shattered. The explosion of glass was sharp, violent, echoing through the tiny home like a gunshot. Ethan reacted before thought could form. He lunged forward, pushing Lily and Evelyn down behind the table as Ranger erupted into a fierce bark, his body tensed, teeth bared. A brick wrapped in paper rolled to a stop across the floor. The room froze. Ethan's heart thudded with the old rhythm of battle. An instinct sparked from tours overseas: ambush, protect, assess, secure. He scanned the window frame, then the shadows beyond. A car engine revved and sped off into the night. He retrieved the brick, unwrapped the paper, and read the crude message scrawled in black marker. "Leave Bozeman. Touch the Hayes family again, and you're dead." Rage didn't come to him, not the loud, reckless kind. What settled in his chest was colder, quieter, a familiar heaviness he hadn't felt in years. The weight of duty. He spent the next hour reinforcing the broken window with boards salvaged from the shed, checking every lock, testing hinges, wedging wooden blocks beneath the loose back door. Lily watched him with trembling hands, Evelyn with worried eyes. Ranger never left his side, pacing the perimeter with ears pricked. Ethan had meant to pass through Bozeman. One night, maybe two. A quiet stop in a quiet winter town. But when he turned and saw Lily clutching her grandmother close, their fear trembling through the dim light of the kitchen, something inside him settled into place. He wasn't leaving. Not tonight. Not tomorrow. Not until this town stopped being a battlefield for the cruel and the powerful. Bozeman's winter had become his new front line. The morning broke with a pale sun barely piercing through the weight of Bozeman's gray winter sky. A thin coat of fresh snow blanketed Lily's backyard, smoothing every rough patch of grass and fallen twig beneath a soft, quiet white. The cold bit at exposed skin, but there was a strange peace in the crisp air, a calm before something far darker. Lily stepped outside tightly wrapped in her worn coat, her breath puffing out in delicate clouds. She looked exhausted from the chaos of the night before, but her eyes, though shadowed by worry, held a quiet determination. She had been pushed around enough. Something in her had begun to shift. Ethan handed her a wool scarf, a simple gray one he had brought from his truck. "Deep breath," he said, tightening the knot gently under her chin. "Fear freezes you faster than the cold. We're going to fix that." His voice, low and steady, carried a warmth she hadn't known she needed. Ethan moved with the deliberate control of a man whose body had been shaped by years of combat and consequence. He demonstrated how to break a wrist grip, how to shift her weight, how to push back even when her instinct begged her to run. Lily, slender but quick, mimicked his movements with clumsy enthusiasm. Her cheeks flushed with both embarrassment and determination each time she stumbled. Ranger circled them like a patient instructor, occasionally offering an approving grunt or a quiet huff through his black nose when Lily did something right. From the porch, Evelyn Parker watched with a knitted shawl over her lap and amusement dancing in her bright blue eyes. She sat in a weathered rocking chair, long silver braid resting on her shoulder, hands mending a scarf for Lily. "Careful, darling," Evelyn chuckled. "Don't go breaking somebody's nose for real. At least not before breakfast." Lily laughed, light, breathless, genuine. It was the first sound in days that didn't tremble. By midday, she had learned how to plant her feet, how to shout from the diaphragm, how to look danger in the eye, even if her knees shook beneath her. And through it all, Ethan observed, not just her form, but her spirit. She wasn't naturally violent. She wasn't bold. But she loved fiercely, and fear couldn't erase that. It only needed reshaping. As the afternoon sun sank behind the hills, thick clouds gathered, turning the sky into a slate canvas. Ethan crouched beside Ranger, scratching behind the dog's ears. "Stay here tonight," he instructed softly. "Guard them. You'll know before anyone else if something's wrong." Ranger leaned into his touch, ears flicking, understanding settling into his deep amber gaze. Inside, Lily was washing dishes from lunch when she noticed Ethan tightening the straps of a small tactical backpack. Her heart tightened. "You're going somewhere," she said quietly. "Not far," he replied. "Just checking on things." He didn't elaborate, and she didn't press. Yet fear curled in her stomach. She already knew he wasn't the kind of man who checked things unless trouble was guaranteed. As night fell, Ethan slipped out through the backyard, blending into the trees like a shadow shaped by the cold. Bozeman's outer woods were thick with pines heavy with snow, their branches bowing under the weight. The sound of his boots was muffled in the fresh powder. His breath came slow, controlled, muscle memory from years of reconnaissance missions in harsher places than this. Eventually, he reached a small ridge overlooking the valley. Below, nestled against the mountainside, the Snowcrest Lodge sprawled like a modern palace of glass and warm light. It was a luxury resort where wealthy families from nearby cities vacationed. But tonight, one of its private villas hosted a very different gathering. Through his compact binoculars, Ethan spotted them. Tyler Hayes, golden-haired, tall, effortlessly smug even in a casual winter sweater, lounged on the villa's deck with a drink in hand. Around him were several friends. Parker, chubby and anxious as ever, clutching a cup with trembling fingers. Mason, forever glued to his phone camera as though life only mattered if recorded. And a few new faces, a brunette girl with heavy makeup and designer boots, a tall boy with a red scarf, and an obnoxiously loud laugh. Their laughter sliced through the night like glass. They passed around small bags of blue powder, the stuff Ethan had encountered overseas. Synthetic stimulants that stripped away reason and inflated ego into something feral. He watched Tyler pour some onto the back of his hand and inhale with shaking excitement. Ethan's jaw tightened. Through the parabolic microphone, he heard Tyler's slurred voice. "Think about it. 1,000,000 views easy. We spray the old lady's place, just a little gasoline, light it up, and then film them running out screaming. Viral gold. Another voice chimed in, one of the girls biting her lip nervously. Tyler, that's not funny. But Tyler snapped his fingers in her face. Everything is funny when you're the one watching. Ethan closed his eyes for one long, steady breath. The cold inside him deepened, not from the winter wind, but from the realization that these were not simply spoiled kids unleashed. They were something more dangerous, cruel without boundaries, armed with drugs and money, and convinced the world would always bend for them. When he opened his eyes, his gaze hardened, his pulse slowed. The soldier within him surfaced with quiet precision. Tyler raised his glass. 2 a.m., he announced proudly. Showtime. Ethan lowered the binoculars. He didn't move for several seconds, letting the weight of what he'd heard settle into something sharp, resolute. The frost beneath him glimmered faintly, catching the moonlight on its jagged edges. He had seen cruelty in many forms, on battlefields, in deserted villages, in the eyes of men who had forgotten mercy. But here, tonight, in a peaceful mountain town, he saw something even more insidious. Evil dressed in privilege and youth. He rose quietly, sliding the equipment back into his pack. If they were coming at 2 in the morning, then he would be ready. And this time, he wouldn't just defend. He would intercept. The snow was falling in thick, heavy sheets by the time the clock crept past 1 a.m., softening the world outside Lily's small cottage until everything seemed smothered in white silence. The storm muffled sound so deeply that even the creak of the old porch boards felt swallowed by the night. Inside the dim living room, Ethan stood near the front window, his silhouette tense, shoulders squared, every instinct tuned to the winter darkness beyond. Lily and Evelyn had been trying to rest on the couch, but neither had truly fallen asleep. Fear didn't leave easily once it entered a home. Then, a metallic crash sliced through the quiet, a violent screech followed by the dull thud of something large skidding off the road. The sound echoed sharply across the empty street. Lily bolted upright, heart thrashing. "Oh my God, someone crashed!" But Ethan lifted his hand, palm outward, his voice a cold whisper forged from experience. No brakes, only impact. That was staged. His eyes narrowed, sharp as a hawk's. "Stay inside, both of you." Before Lily could respond, frantic pounding rattled the front door. A male voice shouted, raw with theatrical panic, "Help! Somebody help us! My friend's trapped! We need help!" Lily took a step toward the door, but Ethan caught her wrist, not harshly, but firmly enough to root her in place. His gaze locked on hers, steady and unshakable. "Lily, this is bait." The words drained the warmth from her face. Behind her, Evelyn clutched the edge of her shawl, her frail hands trembling. Ranger, who had been lying near the hallway, rose instantly, ears snapping forward, a low sound building in his chest like distant thunder. Ethan moved fast. "Ranger stays with you. Do not open that door. Not for anything." He slipped out through the back of the house, vanishing into the storm like a shadow swallowed by frost. Outside, the wind stabbed at his face as he moved through the side yard, boots sinking into the deepening snow. The glow from Lily's porch lights cast long shadows that trembled with every gust of wind. Ethan kept low, cutting behind the neighbor's shed and into the tree line that bordered the road. He reached the small drainage ditch and immediately spotted movement. 3 men. Not kids. Not Tyler's friends. Men built like boulders, broad shoulders, thick arms, their silhouettes blunt and heavy. They looked to be in their late 30s or 40s, hardened by a life of bad decisions and worse loyalties. One held a rusted metal pipe loosely in his hand. He was thick-necked, with a shaved head and a jagged scar running down his cheek, a face shaped by years of bar fights and debts. The second man, younger, wiry but tense, gripped a heavy chain, his nervous eyes darting in every direction. The third was the biggest, a giant with a patchy beard and narrow, mean eyes. They smelled of gasoline and cold sweat, even from 10 feet away. The leader spotted Ethan and grinned with yellowed teeth. "Look what we got here. The hero soldier." They spread out, forming a crooked semicircle. The man with the pipe lunged first. Ethan stepped sideways, catching the man's wrist and twisting sharply. Bone cracked. A guttural cry split the air. Ethan pivoted behind him, slammed him into the snow, and locked his arm behind his back. The chains rattled as the other two hesitated, only a moment, before fear overtook courage. They threw their chains aside and bolted toward the trees. The man on the ground wheezed, his breath fogging in the air. "You're too late," he spat. "Kids went around back. They want the dog." Ethan's stomach dropped, not in fear, but in fury. He shoved the man face first into the snow and sprinted toward the house, cutting through the trees to avoid the front porch entirely. Inside the kitchen, chaos had already erupted. The back door hung crooked on its hinges, the lock splintered clean apart. Snow gusted in through the gap. Tyler Hayes stumbled inside first, tall, blonde hair a mess, pupils blown wide from the drugs still coursing through him. His breath reeked of alcohol and powder. Behind him came Parker, jittery and pale, gripping a baseball point with white knuckles. Mason brought up the rear, clutching an animal catchpole, his hands shaking so violently the metal rattled. Lily stood in front of the wooden pantry, clinging to a cast-iron skillet like a shield. Her knees trembled, but her stance was firm. Evelyn stood just behind her granddaughter, small and fragile but unyielding, her thin fingers wrapped around her cane like it was a spear. Then, from the living room, a growl rolled out. Deep, controlled, measured. Ranger stepped into the doorway, fur bristling along his spine, his teeth bared in a silent promise. His amber eyes locked onto Mason first, the weakest link. When the catchpole swung toward him, Ranger dropped low, muscles firing, and lunged. His jaws clamped around the pole, wrenching it free and slamming Mason backward onto the floor. Parker tried to swing the bat. Ranger pivoted, slamming his full weight into Parker's side. The boy crashed into the table, the bat clattering away. Ranger bit down, controlled, calculated, on Parker's forearm, just enough pressure to cripple the weapon, not the boy. Tyler screamed, waving a knife wildly, but he was shaking so badly the blade wobbled in his grip. Ranger released Parker and stalked forward, step by deliberate step. Tyler backed away, terror swallowing his bravado. He tripped. The knife skittered across the tiles, and in that instant the back door exploded open again, not from intruders but from Ethan's boot. Snow swirled into the kitchen, wind whipping at his coat. He filled the doorway like a wall of will and fury. "It's over," he said, voice cold as the storm. But before the relief could settle, red and blue lights flooded the windows. Sirens wailed. The front door burst open. Chief Dalton, a broad-shouldered man in his late 50s with thinning gray hair and a reputation soaked in corruption, stormed in with deputies behind him. He drew his gun, aimed directly at Ethan and Ranger. "Hands up!" Dalton barked. "Both of you!" Within seconds, Ethan was handcuffed, Lily was dragged away, and Ranger, faithful, disciplined Ranger, was seized by animal control. All while the real criminals hid behind wealth and lies. The interrogation room at the Bozeman Police Department was colder than the winter outside. A small square of concrete and fluorescent light that seemed designed to drain warmth from human skin. Ethan sat alone at a metal table, wrists cuffed, breathing slow and controlled as he stared at the blank wall. He looked calmer than any man falsely arrested had the right to look. But inside his chest, a storm churned, a hard mix of anger, disappointment, and a sharp, growing fear for Lily and Evelyn. The door creaked open, letting in a gust of expensive cologne. Gordon Hayes stepped inside wearing a charcoal wool coat that probably cost more than Lily's entire house. He was in his mid-50s, tall and broad, with a perfectly groomed beard of silver and black, and eyes the color of frozen steel. Eyes that carried the confidence of a man used to bending towns to his will. He set a leather briefcase on the table and slid a single sheet of paper toward Ethan. "Sign this," Gordon said, his tone smooth like a practiced salesman. "A simple confession. Temporary psychiatric break. Combat stress. You lashed out at harmless college students. If you cooperate, charges disappear. Lily is released, but she will leave Bozeman by morning. Quiet. Clean." Ethan studied him, noting the arrogance in the man's straightened shoulders, the faint smirk tugging the edge of his mouth. Gordon Hayes wasn't violent. He didn't need to be. Money had always done the striking for him. "What if I don't sign?" Ethan asked quietly. Gordon leaned in, knuckles braced on the table. "Then your girl sits in jail. The dog is put down. And I will bury you in legal hell. Veterans with PTSD, people believe that story very quickly." Ethan exhaled a soft laugh. Not amused, but tired. "You think this ends because you can buy a pen and a story?" His gaze sharpened. "You should have looked at Ranger's collar." Gordon blinked. "What?" Ethan leaned back, voice steady as stone. "Military K9 tactical system. Camera, mic, stress sensors. When a threat spike happens, it uploads automatically. You didn't just pick the wrong fight, you picked the wrong witness." Chief Dalton, who had been leaning on the doorframe, scoffed loudly. Dalton was a large man in his late 50s, with thinning gray hair and the gut of someone who enjoyed free meals at donor banquets. "Oh, give me a break. What is this, some Hollywood fantasy?" But Dalton's smirk died when the sound of heavy diesel engines thundered outside the station. Boots hit pavement in crisp, military rhythm. The door burst open. A group of military police officers flooded the hall, followed by a man with a stern, rugged presence. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Harris. He was in his early 50s, tall and lean, with deep lines etched into his weathered face. Lines earned in Afghanistan, Iraq, places Ethan once bled in. His hair was clipped short with threads of gray, and his dark eyes carried both authority and the weight of too many losses. He had been Ethan's former commanding officer, a man who understood loyalty like a religion. "Chief Dalton," Harris barked, "you are unlawfully detaining a decorated veteran. Step aside." Dalton sputtered something about jurisdiction, but the colonel ignored him. An MP snapped the cuffs off Ethan's wrists. Harris set a rugged military laptop on the table and opened the screen. "Commander, the upload from your dog initiated at 0132 hours. We saw everything." When he pressed play, the room fell silent. The footage was unmistakable. Ranger's collar captured the entire break-in. Tyler and his friends bursting through the door with a knife, a bat, and a catchpole. Their talk of burning the house for a viral clip. The fear in Lily's voice. The way Ranger defended the two women with disciplined, trained precision. And finally, the moment Chief Dalton burst in and arrested the victims instead of the intruders. When the video ended, Gordon Hayes looked pale, his breath shallow, his world collapsing beneath him like thin ice. Outside, officers were already hauling Tyler, Parker, and Mason through the snow, their faces white as frost. Reporters gathered fast, local news vans, bloggers, live streamers, drawn by the scent of scandal in a small winter town. Chief Dalton was stripped of his badge on the spot, his deputies refusing to defend him. Hours later, Lily stepped out of her holding cell, eyes swollen from crying. Before she could speak, Ranger barreled toward her, tail high, fur dusted with snow, joy bursting out of him like sunlight in a blizzard. Lily fell to her knees, burying her face in his neck as Ethan approached, relief softening his usually sharp gaze. The settlement came quickly. Gordon, drowning in public outrage, agreed to pay damages, enough to restore Lily's house, cover Evelyn's medication for years, and fund her dream of opening a combined grocery and coffee shop on Main Street. A week later, snow drifted gently around the cottage as Ethan loaded his truck. Ranger hopped into the passenger seat, looking eager for the road. Lily and Evelyn stood on the porch holding steaming cups of cocoa. "Your family now?" Evelyn said, touching Ethan's cheek with her cold, trembling hand. "But angels who guard the roads never stay in one place." Ethan's voice softened. "Take care of each other." As the truck rolled down Bozeman's main street, townspeople lined the sidewalks. The new gas station owner, shopkeepers, old veterans in thick coats and wool hats. They saluted the quiet man who stood up when no one else dared. Ethan nodded back once, a gesture of respect, of farewell, and drove into the falling snow. Behind him, Bozeman stood a little taller, a little braver, warmed by the echo of justice left by a 42-year-old veteran and his loyal German shepherd. In the end, Bozeman learned something that cold winter night, that miracles don't always arrive with thunder or light. Sometimes they come quietly, through a worn-out pickup truck, a loyal German shepherd, or a weary veteran who still chooses to stand between darkness and the innocent. And maybe that's how God works in this world. Not always with grand signs, but through people who still believe in courage, in kindness, in doing what is right, even when no one is watching. If you've ever felt small or overlooked or pushed down by the powerful, remember this: every storm breaks, every night ends, and sometimes God's greatest miracles walk toward us on four paws or step forward wearing old boots and a tired smile. Before you go, tell us in the comments where you're watching from, your city, your country, your story. If this tale touched your heart, please share it so it can bring hope to someone who might desperately need it today. And if you believe that God still watches over the broken, the brave, and the ones who dare to stand for others, hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and join us for more stories of faith, justice, and quiet everyday miracles. May God bless you and your family. May He protect your home, strengthen your spirit, and guide your steps through every storm you face. Amen.